Welcome to a Fireside Reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Chapter 41, Part 2. We just read Miss Clarissa saying, "Our brother Francis's child," remarked Miss Clarissa. "If our brother Francis's wife had found it convenient in her lifetime, though she had an unquestionable right to act as she thought best, to invite the family to her dinner table, we might have known our brother Francis's child better at the present moment. Sister Lavinia, proceed." Miss Lavinia turned my letter so as to bring the superscription towards herself, and referred through her eyeglass to some orderly-looking notes she had made on that part of it. "It seems to us," said she, "prudent, Mr. Traddles, to bring these feelings to the test of our own observation. At present we know nothing of them, and are not in a situation to judge how much reality there may be in them. Therefore, we are inclined so far to accede to Mr. Copperfield's proposal as to admit his visits here." "I shall never, dear ladies," I exclaimed, relieved of an immense load of apprehension, "forget your kindness." "But," pursued Miss Lavinia, "but we would prefer to regard those visits, Mr. Traddles, as made at present to us. We must guard ourselves from recognizing any positive engagement between Mr. Copperfield and our niece until we have had an opportunity. Until you have had an opportunity, Sister Lavinia," said Miss Clarissa. "Be it so," assented Miss Lavinia with a sigh, "until I have had an opportunity of observing them." "Copperfield," said Traddles, turning to me, "you feel, I am sure, that nothing could be more reasonable or considerate." "Nothing," cried I. "I am deeply sensible of it." "In this position of affairs," said Miss Lavinia, again referring to her notes, "and admitting his visits on this understanding only, we must require from Mr. Copperfield a distinct assurance on his word of honour that no communication of any kind shall take place between him and our niece without our knowledge, that no project whatever shall be entertained with regard to our niece without first being submitted to us." "To you, Sister Lavinia," Miss Clarissa interposed. "Be it so, Clarissa," assented Miss Lavinia resignedly. "To me, and receiving our concurrence, we must make this a most express and serious stipulation, not to be broken on any account. We wished Mr. Copperfield to be accompanied by some confidential friend today," with an inclination of her head towards Traddles, who bowed, "in order that there might be no doubt or misconception on this subject. If Mr. Copperfield, or if you, Mr. Traddles, feel the least scruple in giving this promise, I beg you to take time to consider it." I exclaimed in a state of high ecstatic fervour that not a moment's consideration could be necessary. I bound myself by the required promise in a most impassioned manner, called upon Traddles to witness it, and denounced myself as the most atrocious of characters if I ever swerved from it in the least degree. "Stay," said Miss Lavinia, holding up her hand. "We resolved, before we had the pleasure of giving you two gentlemen, to leave you, before we had the pleasure of receiving you two gentlemen, to leave you alone for a quarter of an hour to consider this point. You will allow us to retire." It was in vain for me to say that no consideration was necessary. They persisted in withdrawing for the specified time. Accordingly, these little birds hopped out with great dignity, leaving me to receive the congratulations of Traddles and to feel as if I were translated to regions of exquisite happiness. Exactly at the expiration of the quarter of an hour, they reappeared with no less dignity than they had disappeared. They had gone rustling away as if their little dresses were made of autumn leaves, and they came rustling back in like manner. I then bound myself once more to the prescribed conditions. "Sister Clarissa," said Miss Lavinia, "the rest is with you." Miss Clarissa, unfolding her arms for the first time, took the notes and glanced at them. "We shall be happy," said Miss Clarissa, "to see Mr. Copperfield to dinner every Sunday, if it should suit his convenience. Our hour is 3. I bowed. "In the course of the week," said Miss Clarissa, "we shall be happy to see Mr. Copperfield to tea. Our hour is 6:30. I bowed again. "Twice in the week," said Miss Clarissa, "but as a rule not oftener." I bowed again. "Miss Trotwood," said Miss Clarissa, "mentioned in Mr. Copperfield's letter, will perhaps call upon us. When visiting is better for the happiness of all parties, we are glad to receive visits and return them. When it is better for the happiness of all parties that no visiting should take place, as in the case of our brother Francis and his establishment, that is quite different." I intimated that my aunt would be proud and delighted to make their acquaintance, though I must say I was not quite sure of their getting on very satisfactorily together. The conditions being now closed, I expressed my acknowledgments in the warmest manner, and taking the hand first of Miss Clarissa and then of Miss Lavinia, pressed it, in each case, to my lips. Miss Lavinia then arose, and begging Mr. Traddles to excuse us for a minute, requested me to follow her. I obeyed, all in a tremble, and was conducted into another room. There I found my blessed darling, stopping her ears behind the door, with her dear little face against the wall, and Jip in the plate warmer with his head tied up in a towel. Oh, how beautiful she was in her black frock, and how she sobbed and cried at first and wouldn't come out from behind the door. How fond we were of one another when she did come out at last, and what a state of bliss I was in when we took Jip out of the plate warmer and restored him to the light, sneezing very much, and were all three reunited. My dearest Dora, now indeed my own for ever. Oh, don't, pleaded Dora. Please. Are you not my own forever, Dora? Oh, yes, of course I am, cried Dora. But I am so frightened. Frightened, my own? Oh, yes, I don't like him, said Dora. Why don't he go? Who, my life? Your friend, said Dora. It isn't any business of his. What a stupid he must be. My love, There never was anything so coaxing as her childish ways. He is the best creature. Oh, but we don't want any best creatures, pouted Dora. My dear, I argued, you will soon know him well and like him of all things. And here is my aunt coming soon, and you'll like her of all things too when you know her. No, please don't bring her, said Dora, giving me a horrified little kiss and folding her hands. Don't! I know she's a naughty, mischief-making old thing. Don't let her come here, Dodie, which was a corruption of David. Remonstrance was of no use then, so I laughed and admired and was very much in love and very happy. And she showed me Jip's new trick of standing on his hind legs in a corner, which he did for about the space of a flash of lightning and then fell down, and I don't know how long I should have stayed there, oblivious of Traddles, if Miss Lavinia had not come in to take me away. Miss Lavinia was very fond of Dora. She told me Dora was exactly like what she had been herself at her age. She must have altered a good deal. And she treated Dora just as if she had been a toy. I wanted to persuade Dora to come and see Traddles, but on my proposing it, she ran off to her own room and locked herself in. So I went to Traddles without her and walked away with him on air. Nothing could be more satisfactory, said Traddles, and they are very agreeable old ladies, I am sure. I shouldn't be at all surprised if you were married years before me, Copperfield. Does your Sophie play on any instrument, Traddles? I inquired, in the pride of my heart. She knows enough of the piano to teach it to her little sisters, said Traddles. Does she sing at all? I asked. Why, she sings ballads sometimes to freshen up the others a little when they're out of spirits, said Traddles. Nothing scientific. She doesn't sing to the guitar, said I. Oh dear, no, said Traddles. Paint at all? Not at all, said Traddles. I promised Traddles that he should hear Dora sing and see some of her flower painting. He said he should like it very much, and we went home arm in arm in great good humour and delight. I encouraged him to talk about Sophie on the way, which he did with a loving reliance on her that I very much admired. I compared her in my mind with Dora, with considerable inward satisfaction, but I candidly admitted to myself that she seemed to be an excellent kind of girl for Traddles, too. Of course, my aunt was immediately made acquainted with the successful issue of the conference and with all that had been said and done in the course of it. She was happy to see me so happy and promised to call on Dora's aunts without loss of time. But she took such a long walk up and down our rooms that night while I was writing to Agnes that I began to think she meant to walk till morning. My letter to Agnes was a fervent and grateful one, narrating all the good effects that had resulted from my following her advice. She wrote by return of post to me. Her letter was hopeful, earnest, and cheerful. She was always cheerful from that time. I had my hands more full than ever now, my daily journeys to Highgate considered. Putney was a long way off, and I naturally wanted to go there as often as I could. The proposed tea drinkings being quite impracticable, I compounded with Miss Lavinia for permission to visit every Saturday afternoon without detriment to my privileged Sundays. So the close of every week was a delicious time for me, and I got through the rest of the week by looking forward to it. I was wonderfully relieved to find that my aunt and Dora's aunts rubbed on, all things considered, much more smoothly than I could have expected. My aunt made her promised visit within a few days of the conference, and within a few more days Dora's aunts called upon her in due state and form. Similar but more friendly exchanges took place afterwards, usually at intervals of 3 or 4 weeks. I know that my aunt distressed Dora's aunts very much by utterly setting at naught the dignity of fly conveyance and walking out to Putney at extraordinary times as shortly after breakfast or just before tea. Likewise by wearing her bonnet in any manner that happened to be comfortable to her head, without at all deferring to the prejudices of civilization on that subject. But Dora's aunts soon agreed to regard my aunt as an eccentric and somewhat masculine lady with a strong understanding, and although my aunt occasionally ruffled the feathers of Dora's aunts by expressing heretical opinions on various points of ceremony, she loved me too well not to sacrifice some of her little peculiarities to the general harmony. The only member of our small society who positively refused to adapt himself to circumstances was Jip. He never saw my aunt without immediately displaying every tooth in his head, retiring under a chair and growling incessantly, with now and then a doleful howl, as if she really were too much for his feelings. All kinds of treatment were tried with him, coaxing, scolding, slapping, bringing him to Buckingham Street, where he instantly dashed at the 2 cats to the terror of all beholders. But he never could prevail upon himself to bear my aunt's society. He would sometimes think he had got the better of his objection and be amiable for a few minutes, and then would put up his snub nose and howl to that extent that there was nothing for it but to blind him and put him in the plate warmer. At length, Dora regularly muffled him in a towel and shut him up there whenever my aunt was reported at the door. One thing troubled me much after we had fallen into this quiet train. It was that Dora seemed, by one consent, to be regarded like a pretty toy or plaything. My aunt, with whom she gradually became familiar, always called her Little Blossom, and the pleasure of Miss Lavinia's life was to wait upon her, curl her hair, make ornaments for her, and treat her like a pet child. What Miss Lavinia did, her sister did as a matter of course. It was very odd to me, but they all seemed to treat Dora in her degree, much as Dora treated Jip in his. I made up my mind to speak to Dora about this, and one day when we were out walking, for we were licensed by Miss Lavinia after a while to go out walking by ourselves, I said to her that I wished she could get them to behave towards her differently. Because, you know, my darling, I remonstrated, you are not a child. There, said Dora, now you're going to be cross. Cross, my love? I am sure they're very kind to me, said Dora, and I am very happy. Well, but my dearest life, said I, you might be very happy and yet be treated rationally. Dora gave me a reproachful look, the prettiest look, and then began to sob, saying if I didn't like her, why had I ever wanted so much to be engaged to her, and why didn't I go away now if I couldn't bear her? What could I do but kiss away her tears and tell her how I doted on her after that? I am sure I am very affectionate, said Dora. You oughtn't to be cruel to me, Dodie. Cruel, my precious love, as if I would or could be cruel to you for the world. Then don't find fault with me, said Dora, making a rosebud of her mouth, and I'll be good. I was charmed by her presently asking me, of her own accord, to give her that cookery book I had once spoken of, and to show her how to keep accounts, as I had once promised I would. I brought the volume with me on my next visit, I got it prettily bound first to make it look less dry and more inviting, and as we strolled about the common, I showed her an old housekeeping book of my aunt's and gave her a set of tablets and a pretty little pencil case and a box of leads to practice housekeeping with. But the cookery book made Dora's head ache, and the figures made her cry. They wouldn't add up, she said. So she rubbed them out and drew little nosegays and likenesses of me and Jip all over the tablets. Then I playfully tried verbal instruction in domestic matters as we walked about on a Sunday afternoon. Sometimes, for example, when we passed a butcher's shop, I would say, "Now, suppose, my pet, that we were married, and you were going to buy a shoulder of mutton for dinner. Would you know how to buy it?" My pretty little Dora's face would fall, and she would make her mouth into a bud again, as if she would very much prefer to shut mine with a kiss. "Would you know how to buy it, my darling?" I would repeat, perhaps, if I were very inflexible. Dora would think a little, and then reply, perhaps with great triumph, "Why, the butcher would know how to sell it, and what need I know? Oh, you silly boy." So when I once asked Dora, with an eye to the cookery book, what she would do if we were married and I were to say I should like a nice Irish stew, she replied that she would tell the servant to make it, and then clapped her little hands together across my arm and laughed in such a charming manner that she was more delightful than ever. Consequently, the principal use to which the cookery book was devoted was being put down in the corner for Jip to stand upon. But Dora was so pleased when she had trained him to stand upon it without offering to come off, and at the same time to hold the pencil case in his mouth, that I was very glad I had bought it. And we fell back on the guitar case and the flower painting and the songs about never leaving off dancing, ta-ra-la, and we were as happy as the week was long. I occasionally wished I could venture to hint to Miss Lavinia that she treated the darling of my heart a little too much like a plaything, and I sometimes awoke, as it were, wondering to find that I had fallen into the general fault and treated her like a plaything too. But not often. Thank you all so much for joining me. Oh, Dora. Oh, David, how is he going to get out of this? We will find out. I read every day live at 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram. All the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel, Fireside Reading. I love your company and thank you for it. If you do want to look at the Fireside Reading YouTube channel, please subscribe and like and comment if you would like. And I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. Until then, please stay very well. Good night.